so many probiotics are found, like we said, in the refrigerator, the grocery store. And you think, oh, that's a good one. I need a probiotic that is in the refrigerator because that's good. It means it's live. Let's say they are live in the refrigerator, but even if they got there alive, they need to be refrigerated because they can't withstand the room temperature of the store shelf. So if a probiotic can't withstand the room temperature of the store shelf, then how in the world would it ever survive your body temperature, which is 98.6?
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of Better with Dr. Stephanie. 'Tis me, your host, once again, Dr. Stephanie Estima. And today we are talking all about gut health. And now I got to be honest with you. I have always had a little bit of a hairy eyeball, like a little bit of like, what are you trying to pull over me with probiotics? Never really been a big fan of them, never really taken them to any capacity. I always thought that my sauerkraut would pull me through. And today's guest really sheds a light on what a probiotic actually is, why most probiotics in the store are actually junk. So confirming my suspicion, and what are some of the probiotics that we actually should be taking, as well as prebiotics. My guest today is Tina Anderson. Tina Anderson's path to health and wellness started in an unexpected place, the courtroom. As a trial lawyer, she specialized in conflict resolution, but after having her second baby, when you're in motherhood, sometimes the light bulb awakens. She stepped away to focus on her family. She later joined a family-run pharmaceutical company as an in-house counsel, where she became very disillusioned by the industry's medical practices. Tina then turned her focus to natural health and became passionate about disease prevention and the powerful role of gut health. Today, Tina is on a mission with her husband to help people live healthier, more vibrant lives, starting with the gut. And that is exactly what we talk about today. So we talk about Spore-Probiotics. What is a Spore-Probiotic? Why is it different from the lactobacillus, etc., things that we might be seeing on the shelves in the refrigerator? Why refrigerated bacteria is actually dead. It's DOA. It's dead on arrival. We talked about the spore as the gardener of the gut. We talked about prebiotics as the fertilizer for the gut. We talked about foods that we can be incorporating and practices to help our gut and how that changes in midlife. So my perimenopausal and menopausal women, we talk about the estrobolome, which is a area or a cluster of bacteria in the gut that is responsible for metabolizing our hormones, how that changes in midlife, and of course, what we can do about it. I have to say, I learned a lot in this episode. You'll hear me struggling to find the right technical terms. I think even at one point, I'm like, I'm just going to use the layman's term because I don't know what the official word here is. I have not typically focused a ton on gut health, so I am here as a learner with you and alongside you. The other thing I will mention, of course, is that Tina is one of the co-founders of Just Thrive Health, and her company is generously offering a discount code for any and all of my Betties. So if you go to justthrivehealth.com and you enter in code BETTER at checkout, that's BETTER, you are going to get a whopping 20% off of anything in your cart. Please enjoy my conversation with Tina Anderson. All right, Tina, welcome to the Better Podcast. I'm thrilled to have you here today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here.
I wanted you on the show because obviously my audience is it's my Betties who are in perimenopause and menopause who are seeing all of these different changes in body composition and sleep and mood and affect and all the things. And it really does come down to the gut. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about probiotics. And I've always been a little bit of, we'll say, a skeptic whenever I see probiotic strains that are like refrigerated, let's say, or it's like it has 40 billion bacteria in here. It's like, I don't know if I need all that, and B, if that's actually going to be like what I take when I take it, if I'm actually getting that. So let's talk a little bit about the survivability problem of probiotics and how do we actually take something that when we're trying to improve the gut, that is going to survive and like make it to the intestines where we want it to land?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're a very smart woman, which we already know. And that's very clear that you've been skeptical of probiotics because there's a lot of reason to be skeptical of probiotics. We know like there'll be plenty of doctors that will say like, oh, don't take probiotics. And there's a lot of truth to that because many probiotics, in fact, the majority of probiotics on the market really aren't doing much. They're not, like you had mentioned, surviving. They're not getting to the intestines alive. Just to be defined as a probiotic, it needs to be a live microorganism when delivered in adequate amounts, confers a benefit onto the host, which is the body. So just that first part of the definition, being a live microorganism, is so critical. The majority of probiotics are maybe live in the refrigerator, but that's not the definition that the criteria we're trying to meet. We need to be alive when it hits the intestines. Most probiotics are dead by the time they get into the intestines. And so, and we know this has been studied time and time again. And you know, you see these probiotics out there that are 50 billion CFUs, 100 billion CFUs. And there is absolutely no science behind those, none at all. There's no scientific data that shows that more is better. This is typical, you know, North America people, more is better. We want more. It's not
more and we want it now.
Yeah, more and now, exactly. And that's not what really a probiotic should be doing. It needs to be a live microorganism that confers a benefit onto the body. So it needs to be live when it hits your intestines. And most probiotics are dying by the time they get in the intestines. And when you think about this, you know, so many probiotics are found, like we said, in the refrigerator of the grocery store. And you think, oh, that's a good one. You know, I need a probiotic that is in the refrigerator because that's good. It means it's live. Let's say they are live in the refrigerator, which, you know, there's a whole argument that they never made it through the whole transportation journey to the refrigerator store shelf. But even if they got there alive, they need to be refrigerated because they can't withstand the room temperature of the store shelf. So if a probiotic can't withstand the room temperature of the store shelf, then how in the world would it ever survive your body temperature, which is 98.6? And the answer is they don't. I mean, they are dying by the time they're dying just most of the time by being in your body. But then when they go through that stomach acid, the stomach is meant to be the gastric barrier. It's very acidic. The majority of probiotics are being killed off by the stomach acid. And when they hit the intestines, it's basically dead bacteria that's doing something in there. And they may provide some symptomatic relief. They may give you some type of relief, but they're not making a true change in the gut. So what you want to be looking for in a probiotic is a probiotic that actually survives through the gastric system, and when they get to the intestines, is making a true change in the gut flora.
Okay, that's fantastic. Those are my two questions. Like, why are they dying? Is it body temperature, stomach acid? So you've answered that. That's phenomenal. What about probiotics? I have seen some companies, some who've actually approached me, which we've said no to, where I don't know the exact language, so just redirect me if I'm I'm just going to use layman's terms because I don't know the proper terminology, but it's almost like coated with something. So the bacteria is almost protected with a shell, and then that's supposed to withstand the acidity of the stomach. Is there some legitimacy to that, or is that also...
I could raise the problems with that. So that's called enteric coating. So you were pretty much right. It's enteric coating, and companies have engineered their strains to have this enteric coating over them. Some companies put seaweed around them. They put all kinds of things to try to get through the stomach acid. And, you know, it's a great idea and concept. The problem is when they hit the intestines, they're going to be met with bile salts. And so the bile salts will kill them anyway. And then let's just say they do get there. Let's say some of them do get there. They go and they pass through similar to food. And that's the problem. The majority of probiotics will let's say they did get there alive somehow. They may go in there and do something in that gut flora, but they're not making a true change to the garden. I love to use like an analogy of the garden. So if you envision your gut, your intestines as a garden, and you've got weeds growing in that garden that are overtaking the good plants, and then you have the good plants that are they're not thriving in the gut. They're not, flourishing in the gut. They're just kind of like dying and wilted. And so the idea of spore-based probiotics, which are the type of strains that we work with exclusively, we purposely don't use the lactobacillus and bifidobacterium strains, but we use the spore-based because they go into that garden. They get there 100% alive in the garden. They have the ability to attach to the soil. So in your gut, they have the ability to attach to the intestinal cell wall. And then they have the ability to help get rid of that overgrowth of weeds. And then they also have the ability to help our good plants come back to life. Whereas the probiotics that we're talking about, let's say they have some enteric coating on them. Let's say they did get into that garden. They may plant a few plants in the garden, but they're not doing anything with the weeds in the garden. So they're not doing anything with the overgrowth of bad bacteria or pathogenic bacteria. They're not doing anything with our good plants in there. They're not helping those good plants come back to life. Where the spores, what they're doing in that garden, they're going in there, they're like the gardener of the gut. They're going in there and helping get rid of the weeds in the garden or getting rid of the pathogenic bacteria in our gut. And then they have the ability to help our good plants or our good bacteria come back to life and flourish in the gut. And this is how we create diversity. To have a diverse microbiome means you have health. I mean, if you have a diverse microbiome, you have health. And that is the biggest difference, is they are actually going in there and changing the ecosystem of the gut and making it diverse and lush. And it's this lush garden. So you think of a true probiotic as almost being like the gardener of the gut.
Okay, so explain. So this is where I also need to be educated, and this is why I'm so glad that you're on the show. Tell us, what is a spore-based probiotic? I think that most of our listeners can understand, like a lactobacillus, as you've mentioned, this is a bacteria. What is spore? Is this related to fungi? Like what is the origination of it, and why is that able to survive the body temperature and the stomach acid in a way that bacteria is not?
So basically, spores have this endospore shell around themselves. And this is not something that we engineered. This is the way these strains were found in the soil. We always go back to the way our ancestors evolved. Our ancestors would eat roots and tubers off the land, and they would, those roots and tubers off the land were teeming with these bacteria, with these bacillus strains. So not lactobacillus, but bacillus spore strains. And so these spores were our ancestors were consuming these spores on a regular basis, and we were getting these on a regular basis. So if we today lived in a tribe like Tanzania, and in Tanzania, and our land was untouched with all of the contaminants that we're faced with in this modern world we live in, we wouldn't need a probiotic because we would be getting it from our soil. And so the best way to understand it is these bacillus strains, these spores, are, when they're found in the soil, are dormant. So they're not live microorganisms. When you swallow a spore, they're dormant. They stay dormant. They're not live. It's not till they hit the intestines that they recognize the intestines as their home, and they take their shell off, and that's when they become a live microorganism. And again, this is the way our ancestors evolved. Our ancestors used to get these bacillus spores off of the land. So this is not something, we haven't engineered this spore shell around this, or we haven't enteric-coated them. This is truly the way our ancestors used to get their bacteria.
Okay, so the spore is coated with, let's say, a shell. This is the endospore. And when the spore has this shield around it, let's say, or this armor, it's able to withstand the body temperature, the stomach acid. And then when the spore, let me go through this in my mind here. So when it sheds the endospore, then it goes from being dormant to now being alive once the endospore is shed. Is that correct?
Exactly. And it's because these bacteria are so intelligent. They're very intelligent bacteria. They're commensal, meaning they belong in our body. They're gut commensal bacteria. These spores recognize them, or recognize the intestines as its home. And then to make it even better, what they do is they do something called quorum sensing. So these bacteria actually go in and read the microbial environment. So they could recognize if there's an overgrowth of pathogenic bacteria, they're going to deal with that. They could recognize if there are some good bacteria that just aren't really doing a great job in there, they help bring them back to life. And so they will do something different in my gut versus your gut, because we have two different guts. And it's the same thing with, a child and adult. A child could take these in the same dosage as as an adult, because they are reading the microbial environment and handling the gut ecosystem differently, because they are two different ecosystems.
Okay, so now just building on this gardener analogy, which I think is a really helpful one for myself and I know my listeners as well. So once the spore now sheds the endospore, it becomes alive, and then it sort of surveys the quorum sensing term. It sort of surveys the landscape and says what needs to be done here, just like a gardener. Where are the weeds? Where's the overgrowth? What needs to be pruned? What needs to be planted? And then it starts to not opportunistic, that's not the right word. Is it synergistic with other bacteria in the gut to sort of create what needs to happen? Like, how do we know once it's quorum sensing, it says, hey, there's weeds over here, the soil here is not as fertile or whatever. What is the mechanism of action that the spores take in the gut?
They are literally like the gardener. I mean, that's the best way to describe them, because they just recognize it as their home. This is the way our ancestors evolved. This is the way we evolved as a society, getting these spores from the soil. And so, and just to answer a question from before, these are not like a fungi of any sort. It's I know we use the term spore, but they're not a fungi or a mushroom spore. This is just an endospore, this shell, like you explained. It's very, very hardy, this shell around itself. And then it reads the microbial environment there. And then they stay there for about 21 to 28 days. So this bacteria stays there, working their way from the small intestine all the way down to the distal colon, where they're working through the intestinal tract, optimizing it. Basically, they're optimizing your gut flora.
And tilling the soil, so to speak, as a gardener would.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about leaky gut then, because this is something that it actually wasn't a topic that I heard much about growing up. Same thing with allergies. Didn't really I remember one girl, shout out to Gabrielle. She had like a life-threatening, peanut allergy, and now peanut allergies all the same thing. Never really heard about leaky gut growing up, but now it's everywhere. How do these spores, once they've gone from dormant to active, let's say, do they have a role in improving leaky gut? This is something that seems like it's an endemic, right? It seems like everybody and their sister is dealing with some type of GI distress in some way. It's, bloating, distension, poor absorption of the foods. Many clients that I've spoken to, when we do talk about the gut, it's often my stool looks very fatty, or I see undigested pieces of food in my stool, that kind of thing. So I guess my long-winded question here is, how can these spores help to improve leaky gut?
Yes. Well, the exciting thing is that we actually did a double-blind human clinical trial on leaky gut, or metabolic endotoxemia, which is the medical term for leaky gut, it was the first of its kind. As far as I know, there's no other supplement company out there, or in fact, pharmaceutical company out there that has a study of this magnitude, of showing that a spore-based probiotic or a product could actually start sealing up that gut lining. And so the best way I love to, I know your audience is very educated, but just for those that may be new and don't really understand leaky gut, the best analogy I love to use is like, if you envision like a coffee filter, and the coffee filter is used to filter out the stuff that you don't want in your cup of coffee, but then you want certain things to go into your cup of coffee. And that's the same thing with your gut lining. Your gut lining is incredibly protective, so you don't get those coffee grounds into your coffee. You don't get the food particles seeping out of your intestines into the bloodstream. You don't get LPS toxins, which stands for lipopolysaccharides toxins, to go seep into your bloodstream. When food particles and LPS toxins are in your intestines, they're really not problematic. But when they start seeping into your bloodstream, they start to have this chronic inflammatory response. Your immune system recognizes these food particles or these LPS toxins as invaders, and they start this inflammatory response. And it is truly the root cause of 90% of non-communicable diseases, is that leakiness of the gut. And the study that was done with the spores, University of North Texas did this study. They had 100 college students, and 55% of them showed that they had a leaky gut and didn't know it. These are healthy college students. These are kids who had no dietary or lifestyle like issues at all. They were not on any medications. They were healthy, vibrant college students, and yet they had a leaky gut and didn't know it. And I think that's one of the biggest problems out there is that people think, oh, I don't have an issue, but then all of a sudden one day they wake up with one because they've had a leaky gut since they were probably in their 20s. And unfortunately, the world we're living in is just so disruptive to our gut health. So back to the study. So University of North Texas did this study on leaky gut. They took these 55 college students, divided them in two groups. One was the treated group with the spores. The other group was the placebo group. They sent them home with no dietary or lifestyle modifications, which we all know what college students do to their bodies. And that was,
Yes.
not good. Who knows what they were doing? They came back after 30 days, fed them a challenge meal, and found that the group that was treated with the spores saw a 42% reduction in LPS toxins seeping into the bloodstream. So just after 30 days with no other dietary or lifestyle modifications, they saw a 42% reduction in that leakiness of the gut. Now, but this is the part that's the scariest part, is the placebo group. The placebo group saw a 33% increase in LPS toxins seeping into their bloodstream. So what that tells us is that when you have a leaky gut, it's like this drippy faucet. It's like it's not a problem. You have a little drippy faucet. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. But then one day that, sink overflows, the bathtub overflows, and you have allergies, you have an autoimmune issue, you have anxiety, you have all kinds of issues, heart issues, diabetes, whatever it could be. You start to have this, response from this constant chronic inflammation that's happening with the leaky gut. It's the chronic low-grade inflammation that we are suffering from as a nation. And what this study showed is that the spores actually started to seal up that gut lining, which is incredible. And it's truly why we see such profound results with the product.
Well, it's actually interesting that you say that too, because when I first started just describing leaky gut to you just a moment ago, I really just kept it to like gastrointestinal distress. But you mentioned like anxiety, mood, cravings. It's not as easy to trace those back to gut health because you don't think, oh, my anxiety must be coming from my leaky gut.
Right.
You often think, oh, it must be from the stress in my life or the demands or, et cetera. But we certainly also know that gut-brain axis also can certainly affect our cognition, our mood, our ability to inhibit lower brain levels that cause some of this anxiety as well, correct?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I always look at like our brain health as like there's two causes of inflammation in our brain. One is that LPS toxins that are seeping into the gut and causing this low-grade inflammation, and that inflammation goes right to our brain. The other cause of inflammation in the brain are the stressors that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. But our gut is so important for both of those aspects because one, we know we want to seal up. The healthier our gut is, the healthier our gut lining will be and will prevent some of those unwanted particles from seeping into the bloodstream. The other aspect of it is that all of our neurotransmitters are produced in our gut. So 90% of our serotonin, which is our happy hormone, is produced in our gut. GABA, which is our calming hormone, is produced in our gut. Dopamine is produced in our gut. So all these critical neurotransmitters are actually produced in our gut. And for so many years, people always associate them as being, produced in our brain.
If anybody wants to remember, we've said lipopolysaccharides a few times now. The other acronym, if you'd like to remember it a little better, is a little piece of S, right? Because that's what they do, right? They just cause a lot of chaos as well. So lipopolysaccharides are things that just can cause chaos and can exacerbate the leaky gut that we've been talking about. Okay, let's talk about the systemic impact that this has on women. Obviously, when you and I were talking, we were talking about hashtag mom life and like what it's like with children and the stress that happens in midlife for so many women. It's a really unique time in that we have parents who are aging, we have children who are no longer children, they're turning into teenagers and young adults. And then we have our own, career. This is usually, 40s, 50s, 60s, typically is the time where we are, at the peak of our career, let's say. So there's a lot of different things that we're juggling. And for women, of course, we have this very obvious change in our reproductive hormone concentration. So the estrogen and progesterone are the first to, and testosterone sort of follows with it as well. But, progesterone famously starts, early, estrogen follows, and testosterone sort of just goes downhill for the ride with both of them. Who's this sort of hormonal armor, let's say? I want to talk first about the gut's role in processing sex hormones, how that changes through perimenopause and menopause. And I have a couple of other questions that are related to that. So let's maybe start with the gut microbiome's role in metabolizing hormones. And specifically, I'd love for you to speak about the estrobolome.
Yeah, so the gut microbiome is responsible for metabolizing these hormones. I mean, that is what the estrobolome is the estrobolome is responsible for metabolizing estrogen and making sure that we're recycling it properly and not having either estrogen dominance or not enough estrogen. And, I see this time and time again where, I have been knee deep in researching all about menopause for the last, 5 to 7 years, and every single menopause expert is always number one they talk about is you need to take care of your gut during this process. It is not to say that you could have this really healthy gut and you're not going to lose your sex hormones. You're going to eventually, but it is such an important, especially if you're making estrogen or if you're taking estrogen, you want to make sure that you're recycling that and it's excreted properly, that you have regular bowel movements. And that is so critical. So the estrobolome is basically a group of bacteria, a subgroup of bacteria that is helping metabolize the estrogen.
Okay, so estrogen is like the golden rule of estrogen is like use it and then lose it, right? Mm-hmm. So we want to use it, but we don't want it to hang around so that it can cause some of these pro-inflammatory, in terms of the menstrual cycle, a lot of women will notice things like PMS, moodiness, tender breasts, water retention, etc. I believe it's beta-glucuronidase, if I remember correctly, which is as the estrogen is being conjugated and sort of getting ready to be excreted, if we have this dysfunction in the estrobolome, as you're describing, we can deconjugate the estrogen. So it's like it's on its way out, right? It's like set to get out, set to exit the system. And then you have this dysregulated estrobolome, let's say, that's like, no, actually, hang on a minute, and takes, estrogen's suitcase, so to speak, takes her passport so she can't leave. And then she kind of gets reabsorbed back into the system. So what are some of the knock-on effects of having a dysregulated estrobolome? And then I think the more important question here is then how do we change it? Like the spore-based probiotics that we've been talking about, how do we use that as a way to attenuate I should say augment the estrobolome, like to improve it?
Yeah, well, we have to be focusing on our gut health. And the spores are a really, really powerful tool in your toolbox to take care of your gut health, but it's one tool. So there are other things that we could be doing. Even things like meditation or calming practices or going on a walk in nature. Everyone thinks like, oh, what's that going to do for me? But we have no idea. Like you mentioned, all the things that us midlife women are dealing with. It is so real. And like when you said that, it's like, oh my God, all these light bulbs are going off in my head. It's like, yep. I'm dealing with all those things too. And it's like everybody listening is probably in the exact same boat. And and the other thing is we're just throwing all this information at us. Like we should be doing this, we should be doing that. And I always say when it comes to hormones, when it comes to any type of thing that you're dealing with, you just have to start with the gut. It is the most important thing to be doing, is to be focusing on your gut, because if your gut is inflamed, it's not absorbing those nutrients. It's not assimilating those nutrients. So we have got to be really aware of our gut microbiome and how it is, the health of it, because it's going to affect the things like the hormone metabolization, and it's going to affect our mood and all of the things that we're dealing with during hormonal changes in our body, whether it's when your reproductive years or whether it's during your menopausal years and perimenopausal years. So I think it's important that people start with, doing things like meditation or calm or walking in nature. I think it's really important to eat a diverse group of foods. Diversity, I think I mentioned that earlier. Diversity is such a key indicator of the health of our microbiome and therefore the health of our whole body. And by eliminating foods, which I think the world we're living in is always eliminating, we're on different types of diets that are eliminating foods. I'm a fan of trying to start introducing new foods that maybe have been problematic. Once you start healing your gut and making these changes, you will be able to start absorbing these foods and be able to tolerate them better. So I would suggest a diverse group of foods, calming practices, walks in nature, exposing yourself to bacteria. I mean, bacteria is our friend. I wouldn't be using a lot of household products that says kills 99.9% of the bacteria. There's actually studies that show that those products actually have raised children who have more autoimmune issues and allergy issues because we're killing the good bacteria. Another big thing is trying to avoid glyphosate, so trying to eat as clean as possible, trying to eat organic as possible. These are all things that are going to help your gut microbiome. And then, of course, the spores. It's the hammer of all your toolkits. It will make a huge difference, but there's other things. I would never say just go take the spores and then go eat your fast food and your ultra processed foods and keep living a stressful life. We have to make dramatic changes in our life, and it's hard. It's hard. I could speak from experience. Started this business when my youngest was in middle school. My oldest was I think she was just starting high school, and now I'm a grandmother. I've got a 28-year-old. I have a 22-year-old, and it's like those were such formative years of their lives, and it's like I was running a business and doing all this and wanted to be there for everyone, and everyone's got their own story like that. They all have their own story of all the things that they're juggling, and so, but you have to make really big changes in your life just to have a calmer lifestyle, and then I think the spores is another huge tool in that.
What do you think about fermented foods? One of the things I love, probably have it daily, is sauerkraut. And I have, when the sauerkraut is done, and there's more, this is like, I don't know if this is TMI, but when the sauerkraut is done, I drink the juice. I just love, I don't know, I go crazy for this brine that the sauerkraut is in. Uh-huh. I love the brand that I do this with is Bubby's, no affiliation, but they just make the best pickles and the best sauerkraut. Absolutely love them. What are your thoughts on fermented foods? Can that help with, we were talking about the spores being like the gardeners and they're tilling the soil and getting rid of the weeds. Can eating fermented foods also help plant healthy plants and help the gardener in terms of, help the spores in terms of what they're doing? And do you have other examples of foods that you think that we should be eating? Is it like foods from the ground? Let's say you mentioned tubers and things like that. Are there other sort of categories of foods that you would recommend people be consuming on a regular basis? Yeah.
So first I'll answer the question about the foods. So unfortunately, the foods are not, it's hard to find foods that are teeming with those bacteria because our soil is so overfarmed, depleted of nutrients, contaminated with all these glyphosates. Again, if we went to some tribe that has, untouched soil, absolutely all the food that you're eating off the land, and if you're being exposed to the dirt and the dirt that's on these vegetables or tubers, yes, you will be able to get the spores. But unfortunately, in the world we're living in, we're not getting them. Fermented foods I feel that fermented foods are incredibly beneficial. I eat sauerkraut a lot myself. I'm a huge fan of fermented foods. What they are not, though, is a replacement for a true probiotic, because just like Lactobacillus bifidobacterium strains that you find in other probiotics out there, they will die by the time they get to the intestines. They will provide some benefit to the gut. They are very gut supportive. They are nutrient dense. They have all kinds of other benefits for the gut, but they are not a replacement for a spore-based probiotic. But I would never encourage people not to eat them. I eat fermented foods all the time. I'm a huge fan of fermented foods. And that's what I always say, it's hard because with the probiotic, you can't really find foods that are going to replace what a spore-based probiotic does. With prebiotics, on the other hand, we also have a very, very targeted prebiotic formulation, but you could eat prebiotic foods. You could go eat lots of Jerusalem artichoke, asparagus. I mean, there's lots of prebiotic foods if you're eating them in a lot of, high amounts. But with probiotics, it's really hard to find a food that's a spore-based probiotic. That would,
especially since like agriculture, they don't really rotate their crops either, right? I remember reading some stat. It was like we had 20 uses left of the soil if they were not left to sort of rest and regenerate. But what we do is we pull the carrot out and then we just put another seed of a carrot in the same nutrient, because the carrot will suck up all the nutrients from the soil as well, right? So there's with traditional agriculture, let's say, we have this issue, and I think also this may be getting slightly off topic, but we also have this sort of demonization of cows. It's like, oh, cow farts, those are, sort of let's just kill all the cows. It's like, well, if you let cows and chickens and all the animals sort of wander, right, and poop and pee all over the soil, like that's also a form of like letting the soil actually, not turn into dust or sand, essentially, and getting the minerals seeping deep into the soil as well. So I think that, your point is well taken around, you can go to the grocery store and try to, purchase the tubers and the beets and the, whatever it is, understanding that those vegetables were probably grown in nutrient depleted soil to begin with, which is also why it's like find a local farmer's market. I talk to the farmer, understand how they're growing. Are they doing crop rotate? Like ask them some of these questions if it's available to you. Yeah. And if not, then just understand that the vegetables and the products that you're consuming in a typical grocery store probably are coming from nutrient depleted soil.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I'm so glad you brought that up because it is so true. I mean, we're just not getting the nutrients. People will say like, well, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, they weren't taking supplements or they weren't doing all this. And I agree. And believe me, if you could see what my supplement container looks like, it's just that our food doesn't have the nutrients that we need anymore. And we're living in a world that's just so offensive to our health. I mean, it's terrible that we live in this world that every day we're dealing with glyphosates that are sprayed on our food. We're dealing with these, household products that are just, we're being exposed to these bleaches and all these other different ingredients that are just so disruptive to our bacteria. And then to make matters worse, we're not getting the nutrients from our food anymore because our soil is so depleted and they're not rotating the crops like you mentioned, and it's unfortunately not the best picture that we're living in. But there is good news out there that we have seen companies bring some really thoughtful products to the markets, thoughtful supplements that really are helping people change. And we, my husband and I started this business. We came from big pharma. We saw the abuses in big pharma. We saw the overprescribing of medications. We saw it day in, day out, and we saw it with our own family members. And we came into this business for the whole purpose of making the world a healthier place. And we've done it. I mean, we've done it. We've seen it for the last 12 years, what has happened with our customers and our clients. And I'm always about, we want to bring products that are studied and researched and backed by science. That's really, really important to us because we want to elevate the standard in the supplement space. I mean, back 12 years ago when we started, there were hardly any products out there that had a double-blind human clinical trial. Even to this day, there's very few that have double-blind human clinical trials. Their actual formulation. Our studies is not on just one strain in our probiotic. It's actually on our entire formulation, which is a huge distinction and something we could talk about maybe on another podcast, but it's so interesting and how important that is to have a actual study on the finished formulation, because so many products are taking a study from one strain and then mixing it with another strain and you don't know what happens. But I do feel like obviously podcasts like yours, people are educating themselves. They're learning about the different supplements out there. And there is some really good news out there for people that they could supplement properly. They should eat properly. I'm not suggesting to not eat healthy foods because the soil is contaminated, because there are still some nutrients in these foods, but we do need to supplement because what is, a lot of what nature gave us is being taken away.
Yeah, I think it's actually an interesting story. I wouldn't actually mind if you could tell us a little bit about how you got in. First of all, starting a supplement company, it's like the big question is, why would you do that?
Ignorance is bliss.
Yes, but also the acquisition of these spore-based bacteria. I think it's worthwhile mentioning the origins of Just Thrive, which is the company we've been talking about this entire time. So tell us a little bit about how you got started here.
Yeah, so my husband and I were in the pharmaceutical industry and we saw a lot of the abuses. We saw the overprescribing of drugs. We saw our own family members going on one pharmaceutical for one issue. And then before you know it, she was on a half a dozen other medications and
to manage the symptoms of the first one.
Yeah. Exactly. And then we saw, I think what the big thing, we read a lot of Wayne Dyer. We've always been huge Wayne Dyer fans. And Wayne Dyer's message was always you need to do your life's work. And when we started in the pharmaceutical industry, we thought, you know what? This is so great. We're responsible for delivering life-saving medications to these hospital pharmacies. This is awesome. We're really making a difference in the world. But after being in it, we couldn't help but see what was going on. And one particular instance that always comes to mind is we had won this big bid, and this pharmaceutical rep came into our office and said, "Oh my God, this is awesome. Guess what? We just won this bid, and now my job is to go to every cardiologist in this hospital system and encourage them to lower the number that they would prescribe this medication." And my husband was like, "Oh my God, this is crazy. Like, I cannot believe that this guy is going to go to all these doctors and encourage them to prescribe a medication that maybe isn't necessary and then we started to realize, like, oh my gosh, all they're doing is like prescribing medications. They're not talking about lifestyle. And so we just decided we need to do our life's work. And there's so many like little crazy stories that happened with us starting and why we decided to, but we were presented with the rights to buy these strains, license the rights to these strains. And we just dove into the research, learning all about gut health, how important it was. Couldn't find a probiotic that really worked, especially based on all the research that we had done. We were on the island of Capri in Italy on a family vacation and ran into Dr. Oz. And I'm like, okay, if that's not a sign. And I'm like, Dr. Oz. And I felt so bad because he had just traveled. So that was kind of just a funny side note of why I'm like, I believe in signs and looking to the universe for things that are pointing in a certain direction. And so we went back from that trip and decided to move forward. We took our life savings, put it into launching a product. And like you said, I can't believe that we got into the supplement space. It's obviously a very hard space to be in, but it's been so much fun. And that's kind of how it started. And it's been amazing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think what's interesting too, you said, I think at the top of our conversation, you and I can take the same spore and it's going to do different things in our gut. And I can tell I have the Just Thrive. I love the gummies. I know that there's pill form, but I am a gummy girl. So
you're not the only one.
Yeah, I love the gummies. So I have a gummy and my son takes one with me in the morning, like, as we're getting ready, doing breakfast, whatever. And I have given him, and there's no digestive upset. We take the same dose, like I think it's 1 or 2 gummies. We probably just pop in 1 each.
Yeah.
And it's just easy. So yeah, and it's appropriate for kids as well. So that's lovely to hear that you have some, and obviously you're not suggesting that this cures anything. It doesn't cure any disease, but it certainly can help in terms of improving gut function, which then can have a whole host of knock-on effects in terms of brain cognition, all of that.
Yeah, if there's one thing I would want people to take away from this is just how important your gut is to anything else that you're dealing with, and how important it is just to your overall immune system. I mean, we know that 80% of our immune system is found in our gut lining. So whatever condition you're dealing with, if you're just trying to maintain your health, it's your gut where you need to start, because it is affecting virtually every single aspect of our overall health. And it will allow, if you're taking a whole bunch of supplements or if you're eating really nutrient dense food, your gut will help you absorb and assimilate those nutrients if it's healthy. If it's not healthy, it's not absorbing and assimilating those nutrients. So it's really important to focus on your gut health when you're starting your health journey or during your health journey.
I actually have another question about prebiotics. You mentioned artichoke, something I love, asparagus. Define what a prebiotic. So everyone knows probiotic. Mm-hmm. What is a prebiotic? And mention some foods, maybe there's a few others. And then you also mentioned that there's a product that Just Thrive makes as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about prebiotics and the importance of that in gut health?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to take us back to that garden analogy that we talked about. The spores or the probiotic is the gardener in the gut. Mm-hmm. Think of the prebiotic as the fertilizer in the gut. So it's helping magnify everything that the gardener is doing. And here's the problem. Many prebiotic, including prebiotic foods, have difficulty distinguishing between the good plants and the bad plants. So sometimes people will take prebiotics and actually their situation will get worse because the prebiotics are actually feeding the bad bacteria. The prebiotics the ingredients that we work with, it took us years before we ever launched a prebiotic because we didn't want someone to come to our gut health company and find a prebiotic that is actually making the problem worse. So we only use ingredients, these illegal saccharides that actually target only the beneficial bacteria. So in that garden, these prebiotics are going in and helping grow those good plants, and it's not feeding the weeds to make the weeds worse.
And what is the product name? What is that product?
Oh, that's just called Just Thrive Prebiotic.
Okay. Actually, I wanted to ask you about Just Calm, if we can. I know that we haven't we've talked a little bit about anxiety and mood. Talk to me about that product, because that is very interesting to me and maybe we can kind of dive into psychobiotics a little bit.
Yes. So Just Calm is a product of ours it's called a psychobiotic. So a psychobiotic is basically friendly bacteria that supports the gut-brain axis. So we know there's gut-brain axis through the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is, I like to call it, the largest communication superhighway in the body. So it connects from the brainstem all the way to the intestines. And there's messages going back and forth to each other. So the brain is sending signals to the gut, and the gut is sending signals back to the brain. And that's why when I was talking about other things you could do to support your gut health, I said, do a mindful practice, something to be calm, because our brain is actually sending signals down to our gut. And then the reverse is true. The healthier our gut is, they'll send signals back up to the brain. And so we want to take care of that communication between the gut and the brain, and that's the gut-brain axis. So the psychobiotic strain is called Bifidolongum 1714. And this strain has been studied in 8 clinical trials out of Cork University in Ireland. And basically, it's handling those external stressors. Remember how I talked about that inflammation from the leakiness of the gut could go to the brain? That's one form of brain inflammation. But then we deal with those external stressors that we're faced with on a daily basis. We have too much on our to-do list. We're stressed. Someone cuts us off in traffic. We get mad. We're in a fight with a loved one. All these things that we're dealing with on a regular basis are causing these external stressors. What this psychobiotic strain, this Bifidolongum 1714 strain, does is help mitigate that perception of stress. So we're able to handle stress better. We know that, for example, we get into that flow state. These strains actually change our brainwave function. So it's actually bringing us more into that theta wave or that flow state. So it's not necessarily making us tired. It's just helping us get focused and helping us more in that flow state of the way we want to, like that meditative state. In fact, a lot of customers will tell us that it actually helps them meditate more because it's easier for them to get into that flow state. So it's really, really a fantastic product for helping with just being calmer and handling things better.
I love that. So if you had a menopause toolkit, let's say. So a woman comes to you, she's 52, maybe she's noticed more anxiety, trouble sleeping, maybe some body composition changes, GI distress. What are sort of the top recommendations that you have from a gut health perspective?
I always feel very strongly that everyone should start on the probiotic. That is the most foundational thing that someone could do for their health. And I would love to tell everybody, take this, but I never want people to get confused. And we have an incredible product coaches on our team that are really accessible if people have other questions. But I always recommend people starting with the probiotic. If you are experiencing mood issues and you really want to focus on that, then yes, I would add in the Just Calm. But I wouldn't, sometimes I like to just maybe start 3 weeks later. I don't want people to start everything at the same time because then you won't notice what's making a difference. So maybe 3 weeks later, starting with the Just Calm. Of course, the prebiotic is huge for just supporting everything the probiotic is doing. Maybe a few weeks after that, you could start with the prebiotic. But they're all so foundational, but the probiotic is the absolute most foundational. It's like ground zero where you start with health.
So start with the Spore-Based probiotic.
Yes.
Do that for 3-4 weeks. Monitor your symptoms, sleep, mood, digestive issues. And then maybe from there, we would add on the prebiotic or the Just Calm if you're dealing with anxiety, mood changes, or if you're the prebiotic, if I understand you properly, is going to assist the gardener, this probiotic, in planting the right plants.
Exactly.
So we want the prebiotic as well in that mix.
Yes, absolutely. It's going to just magnify everything, all this hard work you're doing, and it's going to magnify everything.
And do you have a sense from clients of Just Thrive, how long it often takes before they start noticing a difference? I know you were talking about the double blind from the University of North Texas, and I think it was 42% decrease in LPS, lipopolysaccharides, after a 30-day Spore supplementation regimen? Is it about 30 days? Is it clinically significant at that point? Even though we can see it happening in the gut, maybe you don't feel it yet, or is there a typical timeline, or is it, I know everyone's a little bit different, but is there sort of a general like 4 to 6 weeks where we can start seeing changes, 8 weeks, 12 weeks? What does it look like?
Yeah,
often?
I would say you'll probably start seeing a difference, by the 30-day mark, but most people will actually feel it sooner. I mean, there are some people that will feel it almost immediately, especially if they have some serious like gastric distress going on. They may feel it sooner than that, but I would say about 30 days, but it's the 3 months, like the 90-day period where you start to see the magic happen. Because what happens is a lot of times people will come to the product either just to maintain their health. They want to just be proactive about their health, or they're coming to the product because they have some, gas or bloating, diarrhea, constipation. And you'll start to see some relief with that sooner than usually 30 days. But what starts happening when you stay on it for a couple more months is then you start to see like, I have more energy. I've had so many people come to me. I have more energy, or I started to lose a few pounds, or I'm sleeping
Your skin
better.
Too, I'd imagine.
Your
like
skin. Oh, very good point. Exactly. And that's when like the magic starts to happen. Because when you're going to the bathroom regularly, think about it. You're going to have more energy. You're getting rid of those toxins. When you're going to the bathroom more regularly, you're getting rid of the toxins. You're sleeping better. So all this other magic starts to happen after being on it for a couple months. But you should see things within the first, 30 days for sure.
Let's just double click on skin for a moment, because I'm often asked exactly what I do for my skin. And there are things, I exercise, I manage my stress, I sleep well. These are sort of foundational basics. There's skincare products and lines that I love and I talk about. But I also think that I have a relatively healthy gut, and that is part of the reason why, my skin looks the way that it does as a 47-year-old woman. Talk to us a little bit about skin and how the gut can manifest into our skin health, and then what are some of the nutrients that we need to be looking at if we want to be thinking about optimizing skin.
Yeah, so definitely there is a gut skin access that we talk about all the time. In fact, that's how I was able to get my daughters to start the product years ago, because, in typical teenage girls, they were starting to get the, blemishes on their face and all that. And so I got them to start taking it. They were like, oh my God. I mean, of course, to this day, they're like huge fans of it because of that. They saw what it did. So we've seen people with the issues, like if you have eczema, if you have acne, if you have any of those types of issues, you have gut dysbiosis going on. I mean, you could do topical creams, you could do all these other things, but those are, Band-Aids really. You need to get to your gut and fix your gut, because that's really the cause of so many skin issues out there.
That's fantastic. I think this has been such a useful conversation and a good primer into perimenopausal and menopausal gut health, because it absolutely does change. I find that if you are a woman who is just trying to white knuckle your way through perimenopause in the same way that, using the same tools and strategies that you were using when you were 25 or 35, you're going to have a bit of a rougher time at it. So I think understanding how some of these things are changing, and then maybe upgrading some of our protocols, at least for gut health. Like I said to you in the beginning of our conversation, I've always had like a little bit of a hairy eyeball for these like 4 billion CPU, these probiotics. And I'm so glad that we had this conversation, because I feel like I understand the gut better now as well. And I hope that my Betties, my listeners will as well. So tell us a little bit. I know that Just Thrive is a company that I use, and tell us a little bit about if people are like, yeah, I need to get myself on this Spore probiotic, where they can find more information about it.
Yeah. So the best place probably would be our website at justthrivehealth.com. And we have a coupon code for your listeners of BETTER, and you could get 20% off, which is
phenomenal.
Kind of a larger discount that we're offering. Yes. So I'm just appreciative of you having me on. I'm appreciative of the listeners that stayed on to listen to the end. And if they have any other questions, we're always around. We have, like I said, an incredible product coaches on the team to understand like what you want to start with, or which ones to complement after you start with a probiotic. We are a gut health supplement company. That is what we focus on. So yeah, just go to justthrivehealth.com. We invest in our blogs. So if you go to our blogs, they're all research based. If you want to dig any deeper in research, just go to our website at justthrivehealth.com, and you can use BETTER for 20% off.
Fantastic. So we'll make sure that that is a clickable link in the show notes. So if you're listening, if you've gotten this far in the show, you deserve a 20%
That's right. I
Thank
agree.
you so much. This has been phenomenal.
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks for the great work you're doing.
Welcome to the after party. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Tina Anderson. So a couple things that I really appreciated. First, you'll probably recognize that even as a practitioner, when I was caring for patients, you could probably tell I didn't spend a lot of time on the gut because it just seemed like this big monstrosity that I didn't know what to do with. So why this conversation is so important and what I enjoyed the most about it is the differentiation between the different types of probiotics. So I really liked the way that she defined what a probiotic is. It is alive and it is a microorganism at the time that it hits your gut, not when it is refrigerated at Whole Foods or wherever you're buying your probiotics from, that it is active upon reaching the gut, the target place. I love that. And I actually loved the analogy of the spore being the gardener. So kind of goes in, surveys the garden, says, hey, we got too many weeds over here. We got overgrown flowers over there. This is the landscape. This is how we're going to optimize the landscape. So I love that. That really helped me understand the difference between a spore versus just a bacteria. And I could really visualize like the endospore, like that shield around the spore, keeping it dormant and then it becoming alive once it shed that. So I really loved that. And then our conversation around the estrobolome, very, very important for women in midlife. As our estrobolome changes, it will change our ability to metabolize estrogen. As I said in the show, the golden rule of estrogen is use it and then lose it. We don't want deconjugated estrogens that are set to leave on vacation, to exit the body, to get their passport taken away, and they have to hang out for longer than they should. So really, really like that. And then maybe the other part that I really enjoyed and a new learning for me as well is the prebiotic. Why a prebiotic, when it's paired with a probiotic, acts like the fertilizer. So you have the gardener, the spore sort of surveying the landscape, figuring out what needs to be done. And then the prebiotic is the fertilizer. It actually tills the soil, helps the soil grow. Overall, and I believe that was the spore does what's called quorum sensing. So a couple new words that I learned in this conversation as well, and has changed the way that I view probiotics. Like I was saying in the beginning, I was like, I don't know about this probiotic stuff. I've always sort of had a bit of a hairy eyeball when it comes to it. So this was really educational for me, and I hope for you as well. I hope that this will also help you reframe the way that you think about gut health in terms of its impact, not only on the foods that you digest, but certainly on your mood, on your skin and on your bones, and just, our ability to produce, hormones and dispose of them properly, and neurotransmitters and all the things. So I hope you enjoyed it. I really did. So let me know what you thought. Leave us a review, Spotify, Apple, all the places. We read them all. We respond to most of them as well. And of course, she was so generous in giving you, my Betties, a 20% discount off of her products, which is a larger than normal discount. So if you go to justthrivehealth.com and enter the code BETTER at checkout, it's going to take 20% off of any of the products at Just Thrive Health.